Hey guys, welcome back. I'm gonna do another live, but it's about my live is gonna be a bit different. Now, I read I'm almost to chapter 4 in the Beatles book, but I will say progressing through the book, I have a funny suspicion, actually not so much suspicion, but I will say in the whole Beatles, because the Beatles were around in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and there's one man I will say that produced with the Beatles or helped them produce many of their albums, including John Lennon's standalone album and a couple of George Harrison albums, but he's done a lot of Beatles records. He published a Leonard Cohen album, and also a Ramones album as well, and many more. But unfortunately, this guy that I'm going to be talking about is far from a good human being because he definitely is not. But we're talking about Phil Spector. Now, Phil Spector was a people call him a narcissist, meaning that, and he was exactly that. That he would do one of the things Phil did, and what he did a lot of was he took advantage of women, meaning that if he went to a bar or a club, he was friendly with women, meaning that he would try to bribe to a woman to go back to his mansion with him. Now, this man should have never had been trusted. Honestly, I'm surprised that he didn't end up. I mean, the fact that he sent police officers, investigators on a wild goose chase on crime scenes, trying to cover them up, is extremely horrible, and trying to evade capture, getting himself out of his sentences in court, his hearings in court, and serving his time in prison, but unfortunately, not a man that. But the thing is, what many of those don't know about Phil is that his whole family had mental health. His dad. I can't remember. His sister was. All of his family had mental health, but really bad. Phil, I know, when he would have these girls come into his mansion, they were locked in his mansion. He would put a lock on his door, and he would often threaten them that they couldn't leave, that if they left, he would shoot them. But he did exactly what he said he was going to do, especially being married to one of them 2 years after his marriage, to a woman from another band. She wasn't even able to go and record in the studio or anything. Phil would have her locked in that mansion. So nobody was safe in this man, women especially, that he would bring into that mansion, he would lock the door. And that's the thing too. Knowing that he worked on many of the Beatle albums, he actually walked in on them in one of their recording sessions, and John Lennon approached him, but Phil had a gun in his hand and was gonna set it off in the recording studio. But there is footage of that on YouTube of Phil walking in and, like the madman he is, threatening the Beatles, that. But this guy was crazy, mentally crazy. He was a narcissist, and the fact that for years and years covering up the murder of, I'll give you the girl's name, but she was, but the detectives had to determine whether or not Phil killed this one of the women he held in his house. And it turns out she did not commit suicide. Um, he actually was sentenced to life in prison for killing her. But all of the evidence was either she shot herself, but the gun was right there by her body. But the thing is that it's a very like gruesome story, but she did not commit suicide. It was Phil who killed her. And Phil was known to have a lot of drugs in his mansion too. But people say that he was even part of a cult, or believe that he was part of a cult. Um, but he died in 2021 at 81 years old in French Camp, California. But yeah, it says he was convicted of second-degree murder for the shooting and murder of actress Lena Clarkson on February 3rd, 2003, inside his California mansion. Prosecutors proved he had a long history of threatening women with firearms while intoxicated, and his driver testified that Spector walked out of his house holding a gun and saying, "I think I killed someone." But the defense Spector had was, and his legal team claimed Clarkson was depressed and had committed suicide by shooting herself. This guy was a monster, too. Prosecutors presented testimony from several other women who testified that Spector had previously, so again, as I mentioned, he would pull guns on women he invited to his mansion if they tried to leave or rejected what he says or rejected his orders. Meaning if so that if they tried leaving or rejected his advances, he would kill them. And forensic evidence expert testimony contradicted the suicide theory, showing the shooting was not self-inflicted. And it has to do with the blood too on the crime scene in the crime scene. Um, but that's the thing is I thought he only aimed the gun at John Lennon, but he did. So, yeah, it says yes, producer Phil Spector did pull a gun and fire shots during the chaotic recording sessions with John Lennon in 1973. Lennon hired Spector to produce his 1975 rock and roll cover album, Rock and Roll. Sessions at A&M Studios in Los Angeles quickly devolved into a drunken, surreal madhouse. Spector frequently wore bizarre outfits and carried a pistol in his hip holster. But even John knew this guy was extremely nuts, crazy. But Spector, so the gun incident involves Spector firing a gun in the control room close to Lennon's ear as a supposed prank. An unfazed or exasperated Lennon reportedly yelled, "Phil, if you're going to kill me, but don't fuck with my ears, I need 'em." On another occasion, Spector brandished his firearm and chased Lennon through the hallways of the studio while screaming threats. But I won't be surprised if they do not mention Phil in that book, in the Beatles book 1, 2, 3, 4, because I mean, especially if we're talking about, the quote that John Lennon stated to him about killing him. If, yeah, like what he said, if you're gonna kill me, but don't mess with my ears. I hope that's in that book, because that is a. I mean, I don't know if they would put anything. I mean, if it's coming from the Beatles, I hope they put it in there. And maybe mentioning Phil Spector of how threatening of a guy he was. Because I mean, there's accounts here even with the Ramones when he helped the Ramones out, but he helped produce their album End of the Century. But Spector wanted to turn the underground punk icons into mainstream pop radio stars. He added heavy layers of echo chambers, strings, and multi track overdubs that clashed with their raw style. He brought in outside session musicians to play instruments instead of letting the band play everything themselves. Bizarre and threatening behavior. The gun incidents, band members like Dee Dee Ramone reported that Spector pulled out a gun and pointed it at them when they tried to leave his home or the studio. Other accounts note he constantly carried weapons and used them to intimidate the band into staying. Repetitive torture. He made guitarist Johnny Ramone repeat the opening chord of Rock and Roll High School for hours until it met his exact standard. Control. He held the band and their crew trapped at his mansion playing loud music and old movies while brandishing firearms. So it came up with a question: did the Beatles like Phil Spector? The Beatles had a mixed and complicated relationship with Phil. While John Lennon and George Harrison initially liked his work and brought him in to finish the Let It Be album and their early solo records, Paul McCartney strongly hated his heavy orchestral wall of sound. Additions, especially on the long and winding road. John Lennon liked Spector's work on Let It Be and defended him, later working with him on solo tracks like Instant Karma and the Plastic Ono Band album. George Harrison initially welcomed Spector to co produce All Things Must Pass, but later grew frustrated by Spector's heavy drinking, un- unreliability, and erratic behavior in the studio. Paul McCartney strongly disliked Spector's style on the Let It Be material, viewing the added choirs and strings as a betrayal of the back to back basics recording concept. His anger led him to legally try and stop the release of the Long and Winding Road mix, and he later spearheaded Let It Be Naked to remove Spector's production. Ringo Starr generally aligned with Paul's dissatisfaction, disliking how Spector altered his drum tracks. I actually like that. So Paul McCartney quotes, and this is a quote about our president, but he says he explained the track's metaphor. Wait. So he actually is through a song he released in 2018 that Paul McCartney released, but it's called Despite Repeated Warnings. It took a direct aim at Donald Trump and other climate change deniers. But occasionally, so he explained the track's metaphor. Occasionally, we've got a mad captain sailing this boat we're all on, and he's just going to take us to the iceberg. Meaning that, and I can kind of see where Paul's coming from with that, is like, what's at the iceberg? Like, is it we're sailing there, getting on the iceberg, and what? Are we going to be left there all our lives? I think if it was the Beatles performing on an iceberg, but I would say Paul McCartney definitely is my favorite Beatle for many reasons because the fact of pushing forward with music is going to bring hopefully the people who are mad in their mind who are who really favorite crazy over but just complete madness. Can we see opposing sides of each other and and ourselves? Absolutely. We're not going to have good days. I will say any good day, any bad day can have light. Any good day could linger into something unexpected. Not saying it would be a bad day, but you don't know, but music's always that source. Because if we're talking about people boarding a ship onto an iceberg, the instruments are honestly your survival. They're your sword or your costume, your onboard costume that tells you who you are. But anyways, guys, thank you all for watching.